And the point for me about going to a networking event is not to see where the transactions are, but to see where the relationships are that might, at some point in time, result in transactions.
And the people who I really remembered and resonated with were more willing to tell the odd story, be a bit more vulnerable.
You'll never have a good time until after, because it'll either be too long of a timer with someone that you don't connect with, or it won't be long enough and you want to spend more time with them, but you have to move on to the next person.
People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Does marketing and content creation ever feel hard and time-consuming? What if it didn't have to be that way?
Join Rob Drummond,
Matthew Bliss,
and me, Pete Daly-Dixon, your ideal companions on the journey to a value-first approach to business growth, here on Help Before You Sell.
So last time on Help Before You Sell, we were talking about using one-to-one meetings, one-to-one consultations as your way of helping people. And we kind of left that on the point that anyone can do that. There is no barrier to entry to having a free consultation with someone. So often for service-based businesses, it can be a good place to start. Plus, you get a higher degree of feedback from people as well, which is another great benefit. I wanted to move on today and talk about networking as a slight expansion of that principle, where you still get the face-to-face interaction, you get the live feedback, but it's on a sort of one-to-many basis. I've really done two stints in networking in my business career. One was at the outset of my business where I realized, holy crap, I need more clients. And a mate said to me, have you thought about going networking? And I went, nah. And he went, yeah, you should probably give it a go. And I showed up at this networking event and everyone turned up in suits and seemed very assured. And everyone seemed very, self-confident. And I realized quite quickly that everyone actually sounded the same. Everyone was like, yeah, I help people grow their wealth. I help people to get more leads. And then I realized over time that actually it's quite a good forum for testing out stories and testing out messaging. And the people who I really remembered and resonated with were more willing to tell the odd story, be a bit more vulnerable. So I think it was a good kind of incubation. And yes, I did generate some leads for it as well. I think it benefits some businesses more than others. So yeah, I wonder, guys, what your experience of networking has been, if any.
I can jump in on that. Before I do, though, I want to give an update on the one-to-one stuff, because when we had the conversation, the next Monday, i.e. the Monday of this week that we're in now, I had a whole calendar full, and you guys were like sweating buckets, even though their calls were in my calendar. Well, something happened, possibly relevant to speak to, and that at least 50% of those calls no-showed.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that kind of just, I don't know, what would you take from that, Rob?
You had too many calls booked in your calendar and that there wasn't enough filtering. There wasn't enough marketing to filter them out.
There wasn't enough helping before you sell before those people came into my calendar.
There wasn't enough automatic helping before
there wasn't enough automatic
helping
yeah.
into place. Yeah.
And just to be clear for the listener, I wasn't responsible for those calls going into my calendar. That was work that I was doing for somebody else. But just a point to kind of reinforce, I think what we're talking about is that when you do help before you sell, you not only get people showing up for calls, but when you get on those calls, they should, at least in theory, be more productive.
It's a feedback loop, isn't it? And you always have to listen to that feedback loop and then make some adjustments to it.
And it's kind of different when you do it for someone else as well, like you just explained there. But the devil's advocate in me wants to point out the scarcity argument. Perhaps again, I can't recall if we dove into it too much in the last episode, but with fewer opportunities to book, people might value them more, and they would establish that value through the help that you give. Yeah. So it kind of, it all chains together into what was hopefully a 50% reduction in time set aside that you don't feel a benefit from just because they don't turn up.
Yeah. It has a knock-on effect, though, because it's difficult to do any kind of relatively deep work like in just 20 minutes, half an hour. So yes, I get a bit of time back, but it's like, okay, well, what do I do now? And you kind of got the load of task switching and stuff. But anyway, that's for another conversation. Networking. Let's get back to that. Because of who I am and my deep interest in people and physical connections, i.e., moving beyond the virtual Google Meets and stuff. I've had various phases of in-person networking over the years. And I think at the beginning, I made the same mistake that most people new to networking make, and that is that they regard the people in the room as potential clients.
As fresh meat.
Yeah. And actually, the more networking events I went to, and the older I got and the wiser I got, the more I realized that going networking absolutely at its foundational level is about helping before you sell. And the mindset that I now go into the networking event is, how can I help anyone that I end up in conversation with? And the point for me about going to a networking event is not to see where the transactions are, but to see where the relationships are that might, at some point in time, result in transactions. Because it is a fundamental truth in business and life that the cliche is that your net worth is equal to your network. And the more people who know you and like you and trust you and can advocate for you in who you are and what you do, the better your life is and the easier your life is, because you're not constantly having to go out there yourself. If you treat going networking as a transactional event, then stuff's only going to happen while you're out there going networking. The idea is to build a network which then works when you're not. If that makes sense.
A lot of networks or a lot of networking events kind of at least used to operate on that basis, where they'd come around at the end and say, who do you have leads for today? And you'd be expected to bring leads to other members to the meeting. And I always found that quite stressful, because I never go out and see anyone or really have conversations with people. So no leads.
Sounds like a test. Like, have you failed your exam from this networking event to create relationships? I don't know.
Yeah, it's just something I was never completely comfortable with. I feel like in hindsight that I actually got a lot more from the networking that I did than my business did, because I know a lot about multi-channel marketing follow-up. I tend to overcomplicate my solution in terms of how I present it to people. So at least going to a networking meeting, at least speaking to someone, even if they're not going to become my clients, because most of them are words, but even just saying what you did, and then going, you get this blank expression, and they're like, what are you talking about? Like, well, okay. The wording of that, I've got in too high in terms of how I'm positioning it and trying to explain it.
I think that's a really good point, though, where it kind of meets in the middle. Someone coming from that transactional networking background, where what they aim to do is establish and deliver the value with people that understand that value and want it. Like the corollary for me would be in a podcasting space. I haven't been to a podcasting conference yet. People network like crazy over there, but there's always questions about why people should go to these conferences to get sponsors for their clients' podcasts, or make connections for editors, for example, to find clients to edit for them. Trying to meet people where they are with what you give, that's just the journey to get to, let's say, our godlike networking geniuses, our Pete Daly Dixons, from people like me, Rob. Like, I think we're both in the same boat there, where you look at networking as the transactional thing, where it's actually about creating relationships. But maybe we are better at creating relationships so far in helping before we sell, which then evolves into relationships. But it's just that they're rungs on the journey, I think. And there's going to be natural talents, genetic talents, and there's going to be people who have to work at it a bit harder, which is immediately what I think in myself. Like, I see what you do, Pete, and I'm like, nah, It's not happening with me.
rungs on the journey, or rungs on the ladder, or something else on the journey. I think we're mixing metaphors here, but that's what we do.
I'm like a what do they call it? A NutriBullet. I just blend metaphors together.
Help before you sell, mixing metaphors since 2025. I mean, I am aware that for some people, the idea of going networking and having conversations with people that they don't know, in a business context, and we have conversations with people we don't know all the time. We down the pub, we get introduced to people or whatever. I have some tips, if you like, if that would be useful to put out there. And this applies to, Matt, you mentioned conferences. That's an excellent place to go network. You don't need to be thinking about just going to networking events. In fact, arguably, conferences are even more relevant, because if you think about, and here there's even more of a danger possibly of thinking about the people that you're networking with as being potential clients. But if you think about where your ideal client might hang out in terms of the conferences that they go to, or the exhibitions that they might attend, then if you go to those same conferences, then you've got an opportunity to network with your ideal clients. But bear in mind, come at it from a help before you sell perspective, as opposed to just thinking, who here could be my next client. The number one thing I think to bear in mind, everybody else feels exactly the same way as you do. Everybody else is thinking, oh God, I've got to talk to people that I don't know, and how do I explain what I do in the quickest, easiest way to understand, and all this. And just in that, there's a tip: is never, ever, even once, please, to God, ask someone what they do. That is just the no one likes answering it, and for that reason, no one should ask it. And also, for me, what someone does is not a reflection on who they are as a human in all of their rich, interesting variety. So, have a few questions which just start a conversation, because ultimately everything comes down to conversation.
Questions such as what?
So, have you come far for this event? Let's say you're both at a conference. Like, where are you from? Is this the first time if it's a conference that's been running, for a lot of years, is this your first time to this conference? Is my first time. Do you know what I mean? Just find something to start a conversation. And even in just saying that, I'm thinking, well, I don't have any challenges in starting a conversation with people. Maybe it needs a podcast episode of its own. I don't know.
I used to ask people who their ideal client was, in terms of who is it that you're trying to find?
Just find common ground. And it's a lot easier to find common ground than you think it might be. Another challenge that people have with networking events and conferences is they see pockets of groups of people that are talking. There might be 3 people over here and 4 people over there, and think like everyone's in groups, and I'm not, and I can't barge in and start talking to a group. Have either of you been in that situation?
To a degree, yeah. I think honestly, I've generally felt welcomed at networking events. I think you just have to go into it and realize this is not a one-time deal. Like, if you're going to use this as an approach, like, you're going to have to be consistent. So there's a hark back to the consistency episode, and it's a long-term thing. It's like, well, you've got to invest the time in it, and you've got to get to know the people who are also showing up on a regular basis.
That applies 100% to regular networking events. I guess I'm thinking more about one-off events or conferences and stuff. And the thing there is that I can guarantee you that not everyone is in a group, and find someone else who's on their own and just go and start a conversation. Just go and ask them one of your handful of conversation starter questions, and then you then become a group. And if you see anyone walking past, you be the person to invite people into a conversation, and then you become people feel good about that. I'm kind of waffling. I think one it's easy to do that when you're talking about something that comes naturally to you and you're trying to explain.
Well, if it helps, I can give you a bit of a frame. The thing that I'm getting from you here is genuine curiosity.
Yes.
Be curious about what people have come for, what they're doing, what they're about, who they are. And if you can come in to create those groups by generating curiosity, like making people curious about you as well, or having something particular that people can latch onto to start the conversations, that seems to be a key component of what you're explaining there.
I went speed networking once. It's one of the most terrifying things I've ever done. I'd much rather have like one, possibly two proper conversations. If you know what, actually, if I go and have one proper conversation with an interesting person who I either hadn't met before or didn't know very well, I think that's a good outcome.
The way I think about it, you'll never have a good time until after, because it'll either be too long of a timer with someone that you don't connect with, or it won't be long enough and you want to spend more time with them, but you have to move on to the next person. And I don't think there's anyone who would be just right to talk to for only 2 minutes, and that's it.
I think people expect too much from those 2-minute conversations as well.
Mm.
Like that's just a framer for like, can you say something that's going to get them to go, oh, right, that's interesting. Can you tell me more? Or could we have 10 minutes next time we meet? Or could we have a 15-minute conversation, afterwards? Like, you're not going to achieve that in its, I've done that. Yeah.
Sorry, I just had a thought that, like, what's stopping you from just standing up from the table and going, you know what? I'd like to talk to you for an hour. Should we ditch this and just, like, go and get a beer? Has that happened?
It's networking Matthew Bliss style.
Yeah. Take what you need and run away.
Just on when you were talking there, Matt, reminded of a couple of quotes. One from the book "7 Habits of Highly Effective People" by Stephen Covey, and one of the habits is seek first to understand before being understood. And I think that speaks to the challenge that people have when they go networking, is they want to make themselves and their business understood by the people that they're talking to. Whereas if you seek first to understand, then that creates the opportunity then to have a dialogue and a conversation where you can then be understood. And the other quote that came to mind was, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And you know a ton of stuff about your business and about the problems you solve, but it all counts for naught unless the person you're talking to knows, almost at a cellular level, that you care about them as a human. Overarching all of this, you just come back to the constant thread, I think, through all of these episodes, is that we're talking about a long-term game here. If you are desperate for new clients, don't go networking, because that energy will just be so vibrant from you that people will run a mile. This is something that you do to develop relationships, which in time could create opportunities, which in time might lead to more business and the like.
I have two thoughts. One is to really find the right network. I think if you're saying your networking is not working and networking doesn't work, it doesn't work for me, it's like, well, maybe it was the wrong network, maybe it was the wrong vibe, maybe it was the wrong crowd. Thinking back to networking, so most of what I did was kind of breakfast meeting type events, and the people who did really well out of it were, I remember one guy ran a local car garage, and he just used to show up and talk about what's really involved in servicing. He was a proper engineer, basically, and he just used to talk about what he did. And so, funnily enough, next time all of our cars came around for for servicing, guess where we all went? So he did quite well out of it, and obviously we referred everyone that we knew to him, because everyone always needs a trustworthy garage that they can go to. All of the financial planners and the life coaches, they kind of blurred into one for me. I think you've really got to have something different about you if you're going to go to that forum and generate business.
Funnily enough, that also applies to podcasting very heavily. Like, it's very easy to have a very whitewashed kind of environment in podcasting, just like coaching. You need to separate yourself somehow. Yeah.
But I guess the point is that there will be the right network for you somewhere, and I think everyone does need a network. So I think it's silly to dismiss it as not working. The other thought I had was that going networking, actually, you can't isolate networking from all of the other ways that you might help before you sell. because you'll probably go networking. You'll at least have a business card, which you probably want to put a bit of thought into, actually, because there might be what we call a homepage video linked to from the business card. You might, in my case, I used to take my books. So instead of giving people business cards, well, I still had business cards, but I used to put the business card inside a book and give them a book, which, cost me pennies in the grand scheme of things. But that's kind of what I used to do as my way of kind of giving a bit more as well. So these things all kind of coalesce and tie together.
They link together.
Yeah, and it's worth thinking about, okay, in that interaction, how can you leverage some of the other ways that you're helping before you sell? Because you're not just going to do one of these things. You're going to pick a mix of activity that's right for you. But then those activities actually need to come together in a coherent way. Because people just experience you. They don't experience your emails. In our brains, we kind of like think of every channel separately, but people don't think about your emails, your video, your networking activity, your social posts. Like, they just experience you. So I think in going to these events, it's a good opportunity to think about, okay, you've got your business card. How is that going to tie to the other ways that you're helping before you sell?
And if your next question is about QR codes, I think you need to find another podcast, because I'm getting really tired of answering the question about QR codes. Completely off topic. That can be a bonus supplemental content afterwards. But yeah, I find it really interesting, this stuff, and I think maybe I can be the test case for both of your advices, where I can go out and find some networking events and take them for a spin, because I've been historically horrible at it. I can find my book to slip the business card into and give everybody that great experience.
Yeah, I think you summed it up brilliantly, Matt. Just be genuinely curious about other people. I think if we go through life with a greater sense of curiosity, I think that's generally a good state to be in.
And that's a practice, isn't it? It's a practice that you have to keep coming back to, and it's a practice that you'll probably get wrong and go off the path and pursue what you want for a bit, and then you go, oh no, I didn't quite get that right. And that's okay. Well, next time we will move on and talk about live events.
Perfect.
Later.
All right, cheers guys.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Help Before You Sell, sponsored by Activate Your Podcast. To activate your podcast and help the people who most need you and your services, head to activateyourpodcast.com/help. If you found this episode helpful, please also leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And remember, help more to sell more. See you next time.